Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. People often think park rangers have the most peaceful jobs. And to be fair, I used to think that too. But after what happened to me in 1996 at the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas, my whole perspective shifted. My name is Wes Fairbanks. I've been working at the park for 6 years, not that long compared to some of the other guys, but long enough to know the woods like the back of my hand. I wasn't armed, never saw the point. This was in Alaska, and the only creatures out here were mostly deer and the occasional coyote. If anything, I carried a baton just in case a trespasser got too rowdy. Besides, when you grow up in a small town, you don't think much of danger. Most of it's been hyped up by people who've never even stepped foot into the wilderness. That all changed one late afternoon in September. I'd been called out to check on some reports of strange noises coming from an area deeper in the woods. The Forest Service hotline received a few complaints from nearby campers who said they heard something large moving around at night, bigger than a deer and definitely not a coyote. It was nothing new. People got spooked by the simplest things. But hey, it's part of the job, and sometimes it's just easier to check these things out, give the tourists some peace of mind. I grabbed my radio, told Frank, my co-worker on the evening shift, that I was heading out and would probably be back before dusk. Frank gave me a lazy thumbs up without even looking up from his crossword puzzle. The area I had to check was about 3 miles from the ranger station, close to one of the less popular trails. We didn't have too many campers that far out, which is why it seemed odd anyone would report something unusual from there. The hike was uneventful, though the woods were eerily quiet. There were no birds, no wind rustling through the trees, just stillness. But I didn't think too much of it. Sometimes nature just goes silent when a storm is coming. Or maybe I wasn't paying attention. I reached the site where the sounds had been reported, a clearing with a small campsite. There were signs someone had been there recently, maybe a couple of days ago, but nothing out of the ordinary. A few beer cans were scattered around, a fire pit had charred logs, and a tent that had collapsed like someone had bothered to take it down properly. I assumed it was just some drunk hikers who left in a hurry. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop, a backpack. It was ripped clean in half, like it had been sliced through by something sharp. The ground around it was disturbed, not like tracks, but more like a struggle had happened there. Dirt and leaves were kicked up, and I could see deep grooves where something heavy had been dragged. My radio crackled. It was Frank, asking if I'd found anything yet. I told him about the backpack, how it looked like someone had gotten into some kind of trouble out here. Frank's voice, always casual, sounded a little sharper. He asked if I wanted him to come out and meet me. I waved it off. I'd seen animal attacks before, and this didn't look like one. I wasn't too far from the station either. I told him I'd keep looking. I circled the area looking for any sign of who had been here. The trees were dense, but I noticed a few branches had been snapped, big ones, like someone or something had barreled through them in a hurry. I followed the trail deeper into the woods, hoping it was just some kids messing around. But the farther I went, the more uneasy I felt. The silence was almost suffocating. That's when I heard it. A low, heavy breathing. Not close, but near enough that I stopped in my tracks. I scanned the trees, trying to see what the hell was out there. It was hidden behind the thick foliage, but I could tell it was massive, moving slowly, like it didn't care who or what knew it was there. My heart raced, but I couldn't see it, just that sound. I radioed Frank again. This time, my voice a little more tense, told him something big was moving around out here. Something that wasn't afraid of me. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. I wasn't sure I had 20 minutes, but I wasn't about to admit that to him. The breathing grew louder, closer. Then without warning it stopped. Just gone. The silence returned, heavier than before. I stood there frozen, my hand gripping the baton on my belt like it was going to do me any good. And that's when I saw it. About 40 yards ahead, through the thick trees, something stepped into the clearing. It moved on all fours, but was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its body was covered in coarse dark fur, and its limbs were longer than they should have been, unnaturally bent. It was the size of a bear, but bears don't move like that. Bears don't have limbs that stretch out like a spider, reaching from one tree to the next with an eerie, deliberate grace. It turned its head in my direction. I couldn't make out details, thank God for that. But the way it moved was enough to freeze me in place. It was like working in a wolf that had been stretched out and distorted, like something nature didn't intend to exist. It let out a noise that wasn't a growl or a roar, but a deep bone-chilling sound that made every hair on my body stand up. I should have run. I wanted to, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. Then it stood up. On two legs, it was massive, towering over the trees, and now it moved faster. Not towards me, but away. I had no idea what it was chasing, but terror hit me full force. That thing wasn't hunting for food, it was hunting for sport. I didn't wait to find out what it was after. I bolted back toward the station. My heart pounded so hard that I thought it might burst out of my chest. I stumbled through the trees, barely able to keep my footing as I ran, not daring to look back. Halfway back, I heard it again, that breathing right behind me. I radioed Frank, screaming at him to get here now. I didn't care if it made me sound like a coward. I wasn't about to be the next guy they found dragged through the woods. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, I was panting and drenched in sweat. And Frank was there, wide-eyed with his rifle ready. He looked at me like I was insane. I tried to explain what I saw, but nothing came out right. I sounded like a lunatic, and I knew it. Then, behind us, there was a scream. High-pitched, desperate human. Frank and I ran toward the sound. And what we found in that clearing is something I won't ever forget. A body, or what was left of it, torn apart, limbs scattered like broken toys. The stench was overwhelming. A mix of blood and something far more primal. And then we saw the footprints, massive, deep prints like a wolf's, but so much bigger. They led back into the trees, disappearing into the darkness where no sane person would ever follow. Frank muttered, "What the hell?" His voice was shaky for the first time since I'd known him. I stood there staring at the carnage, my mind numb. Whatever had done this was still out there somewhere in those woods, and there was no way in hell I was going back in. We never did find out what that thing was. A few weeks later, the park closed off that area to the public. Officially, they called it a wildlife incident. Yeah, right. A month later, I quit my job, moved to the city. No more forests, no more wildlife. I get nervous walking past the zoo now, and I don't go near any parks. People ask me why I left, and I always give them the same answer: I just needed a change. What I don't tell them is that I don't ever want to be in a place where something bigger, faster, and smarter than me is hunting for fun. Last I heard, Frank's still working out there, poor bastard. Oh, and in case you're wondering, no, they never did find out who that body belonged to. Guess it doesn't really matter. The weeks following the incident were a blur of police interviews, Park Service inquiries, and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the image of that thing from my mind. Its unnatural movements, the way it seemed to defy everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The official investigation was a joke. They brought in some wildlife experts who spouted theories about unusually aggressive bears or mountain lions, but I knew what I saw wasn't any kind of normal animal. Frank backed me up at first, but as time went on, I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. He started to distance himself from me like he was afraid my crazy might be contagious. I couldn't blame him. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it either. But I knew what I saw, and I was determined to find out more. I started digging into the park's history, looking for any similar incidents. It wasn't easy. A lot of the older records were incomplete, or had been lost over the years. But slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Every few decades, there would be a spike in missing persons cases in the park. While official reports always chalked it up to hikers getting lost or animal attacks, but the details were eerily similar to what I'd experienced. Strange noises in the woods, unidentifiable tracks, and in a few cases, remains that had been torn apart in ways that defied explanation. The most recent cluster of disappearances had been in the late 1960s. A group of campers had gone missing, and the only thing found was a campsite that had been destroyed in a way that the investigators said looked more like a tornado had hit it than any animal attack. As I dug deeper, I started to notice other oddities. The area where I'd seen the creature was part of an old logging tract that had been abandoned in the 1940s. The official reason was that the area had been over-harvested, but I found an old newspaper article that told a different story. According to the article, the logging company had pulled out after a series of accidents and disappearances. Workers reported hearing strange noises at night and seeing shadows moving in ways that didn't seem natural. The company hushed it all up, of course. Can't have people thinking your logging camp is haunted by some kind of monster. But the most chilling discovery came when I was going through some of the oldest park records. It was a journal entry from one of the first park rangers, dated. He wrote about an encounter with what he called a devil wolf. The description matched what I'd seen almost exactly. The unnaturally long limbs, the way it moved, even that bone-chilling sound it made. The ranger wrote that he'd spoken to some of the local Native American tribes about it. They had stories about a creature they called the Shadow Walker, a beast that hunted not for food but for the pleasure of the kill. They said it had been there long before the first settlers arrived, and that it would be there long after we were gone. As I read those words, a chill ran down my spine. This thing, whatever it was, had been in these woods for centuries, and now that I knew about it, I couldn't just walk away. I had to do something. But what could one ex-park ranger do against a creature that had eluded detection for so long? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out, even if it meant going back into those woods and facing my fears head-on. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to go back to the Ouachita National Forest. In that time, I gathered every bit of information I could find about the creature and the area where I'd seen it. I'd also prepared myself as best I could, buying camping gear, a high-powered rifle, even though I doubted it would do much good, and a video camera. If I was going to face this thing again, I was going to make damn sure I had proof this time. I arrived at the park on a crisp October morning. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the forest in shades of red and gold. It would have been beautiful if I hadn't been so terrified. I parked my car at the ranger station, nodding to the new guy behind the desk. He didn't know me, which was good. I didn't want anyone asking questions about why I was here. I shouldered my pack and headed out onto the trail. The hike to the area where I'd seen the creature was just as I remembered it, but everything felt different now. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. I kept expecting to see that thing loping through the trees, its impossibly long limbs reaching out for me. As I neared the clearing where I'd first seen it, my heart started pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I forced myself to keep going, one foot in front of the other. I had to know. I had to see it again to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. The clearing looked much the same as it had that day, except now there was yellow police tape stretched between the trees. The backpack was gone, of course, but I could still see the marks in the earth where something heavy had been dragged. I set up my camp at the edge of the clearing, making sure I had a clear view in all directions. As the sun began to set, I settled in for a long night of watching and waiting. Hours passed, the forest grew dark, the only light coming from the nearly full moon overhead. I sat there, my rifle across my lap, the video camera set up on a tripod next to me. Every sound made me jump, my eyes straining to see in the darkness. It was just past midnight when I heard it. That same low, heavy breathing I remembered from before. My whole body tensed. I picked up the camera, my hand shaking as I pointed it in the direction of the sound. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then at the edge of the clearing, something moved. It was just a shadow at first, darker than the surrounding night. But as it stepped into the moonlight, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was even more terrifying than I remembered. Its body was covered in thick matted fur, black as pitch. Its limbs were impossibly long and jointed in ways that defied anatomy. But it was the face that truly horrified me. It was a twisted parody of a wolf's muzzle, elongated and filled with teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. And its eyes, God, its eyes, they glowed with an intelligence that was all too human. I sat there, frozen in terror as the creature surveyed the clearing. It moved with that same eerie grace I remembered, its movements too fluid for something of its size. Then its head swiveled in my direction, and those glowing eyes fixed on me. In that moment I knew I had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't some animal I could study or understand. This was something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world, and I had come here alone to face it. The creature let out a bone-chilling sound somewhere between a howl and a scream. Then it charged. I don't remember picking up my rifle, but suddenly the night was filled with the crack of gunshots and the acrid smell of cordite. I emptied the entire magazine into the creature, but it didn't even slow down. I scrambled out of my tent, abandoning everything but the camera, and ran blindly into the woods, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, that terrible breathing getting closer and closer. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were on fire. But I knew it wasn't enough. The creature was toying with me, letting me think I had a chance before it closed in for the kill. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I burst out of the trees onto a dirt road, and there, like some kind of miracle, was a beat-up old pickup truck. I didn't question it, I just ran for it, praying that the keys were in the ignition. They were. I threw myself into the driver's seat, turned the key, and stomped on the gas. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out onto the road, spraying gravel behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature emerge from the trees. It stood there in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. Even from that distance, I could feel the weight of its gaze. It wasn't angry, it wasn't disappointed, it was patient. Because it knew, just as I did, that this wasn't over. I drove until the sun came up, putting as much distance between myself and the forest as I could. I knew it didn't matter, because now I understood the truth. The creature wasn't confined to that forest. It could go anywhere it wanted. And now that it knew me, now that I had challenged it, it would never stop hunting me. As I drove, I realized the camera was still clutched in my hand. With shaking fingers, I rewound the tape and pressed play. The footage was dark and shaky, but there it was. Undeniable proof of the creature's existence. Its glowing eyes, its unnatural movements, all captured on film. I didn't know what to do with this evidence. From you'd believe me. The police? The media? I'd be laughed out of town, or worse, locked up in a psych ward. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed a plan. I drove to a small motel on the outskirts of Little Rock, checked in under a false name, and collapsed onto the bed. As exhaustion overtook me, one thought kept repeating in my mind. What have I gotten myself into? The next few weeks were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. And our shadows seemed to move. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I spent my days poring over the footage I'd captured, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I reached out to cryptozoologists, folklorists, anyone who might have some insight into what this thing could be. Most dismissed me outright, but a few showed interest. One researcher, Dr. Helena Morris, agreed to meet with me. She specialized in folklore surrounding predatory creatures and had written several books on the subject. When I showed her the footage, her face went pale. "Mr. Fairbanks," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you have any idea what you captured here?" I shook my head, waiting for her to continue. "This creature," she said, "matches descriptions of something the Native Americans in that region called the Wendigo. It's a creature of insatiable hunger, always hunting, always killing. But it's more than just a beast. It's a spirit of sorts, capable of possessing humans and turning them into monsters." I felt a chill run down my spine as she spoke. In all fact, the creature's intelligence, its seemingly supernatural abilities, the way it had been haunting those woods for centuries. "But here's the thing," Dr. Morris continued, her eyes meeting mine. "By capturing on film, by pursuing it, you've drawn its attention. The Wendigo doesn't just hunt for food, it enjoys the chase, the terror of its victims. And now, Mr. Fairbanks, I'm afraid you've become its newest prey." I left Dr. Morris' office with a mix of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that someone else believed me, but dread at the implications of what she had told me. This thing, this Wendigo, isn't going to stop. It will keep coming for me, no matter where I went. That night, as I tried to sleep in yet another anonymous motel room, I heard it. That familiar, heavy breathing outside my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned to look. Silhouetted against the neon glow of the motel sign was a shape. Tall, unnaturally thin, with arms that seemed to stretch down to the ground. It stood motionless, watching me through the window. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew it had been there, and the Wendigo had found me. From that moment on, I was on the run. I drove from town to town, never staying in one place for more than a night or two. I changed my appearance, used cash instead of credit cards, did everything I could to stay off the grid. But it wasn't enough. Everywhere I went, I felt its presence. Sometimes it was just a feeling, a prickling on the back of my neck that told me I was being watched. Other times I'd catch glimpses of it, a shadow moving too fast to be natural, a face in a crowd that didn't quite look human. I tried to warn people, telling them about the danger lurking in the woods. But no one believed me. They saw a man wild-eyed and unshaven, ranting about monsters, and they turned away. I couldn't blame them. I wouldn't have believed me either. As weeks turned into months, I felt myself starting to unravel. The constant fear, lack of sleep, isolation. It was all taking its toll. I began to wonder if this was the Wendigo's true power. Not its physical strength or hunting prowess, but its ability to drive its victims mad with fear. But I couldn't give up. I had to find a way to stop this thing, to end the hunt once and for all. Because if I didn't, I knew it would keep killing, spreading its evil across the land. And that was something I couldn't allow, no matter the cost, to myself. It was a year to the day since my first encounter with the Wendigo when I decided to make my stand. I was tired of running, looking over my shoulder. If this thing wanted me, it was going to have to face me head on. I returned to the Newachita National Forest, to the same clearing where it had all begun. As I set up camp, I could feel the weight of the creature's gaze upon me. It knew I was here, it knew what I was doing, and it was waiting. Night fell, and with it came a stillness that seemed to suck the very air from my lungs. The forest was silent, as if every living thing had fled in anticipation of what was to come. I sat by my campfire, my rifle across my lap, and waited. Hours passed. The moon rose high in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. And man, I heard it. That familiar heavy breathing, the sound of twigs snapping under impossible weight. It was coming. The Wendigo stepped into the clearing. Its form was even more nightmarish than I remembered. In the flickering firelight, I could see every detail of its twisted body, its face a mask of hunger and malice. It stood there, regarding me with those glowing eyes, and I knew that this was it. One of us wasn't leaving this clearing alive. I raised my rifle, but before I could fire, the creature moved. It was on me in an instant, knocking the gun from my hands with a swipe of its elongated arm. I rolled away, scrambling for the knife at my belt. The Wendigo let out that bone-chilling howl, a sound of triumphant anticipation. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival. I slashed and stabbed with my knife, but it seemed to have little effect on the creature. Its claws raked across my chest, leaving deep, burning gashes. We crashed through the underbrush, a tangle of limbs and fury. I don't know how long we fought. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that primal contest of will and strength, but gradually I began to tire. My movements became slower, my reactions dulled by pain and exhaustion. The Wendigo, on the other hand, seemed tireless. Its attacks came with undiminished ferocity. As I lay on the forest floor, battered and bleeding, the creature looming over me, I had a moment of clarity. This was how it had always been, the Wendigo, ancient and implacable, preying on humanity, an embodiment of our darkest impulses, our insatiable hunger, and here I was, trying to stop it with nothing but human determination and a hunting knife. But in that moment of despair, I found a reservoir of strength I didn't know I possessed. With a roar of defiance, I surged upward, driving my knife deep into the Wendigo's chest. The creature let out a shriek of pain and fury, a sound that seemed to shake the very trees around us. For a moment we stood there, locked together. Then, slowly, the light began to fade from the Wendigo's eyes. It stumbled backward, dark, ether pouring from the wound in its chest. With a final rattling breath, it collapsed to the ground. I stood there, panting, unable to believe what had just happened. Had I done it? Had I actually killed the Wendigo? But as I watched, the creature's body began to dissolve, melting away like mist in the morning sun. Within minutes, there was nothing left but a dark stain on the forest floor. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of my injuries hit me. I stumbled back to my camp, patching myself up as best I could. As dawn broke, I made my way out of the forest, leaving behind the scene of my desperate battle. The years since that night in the forest have been difficult. The physical scars have healed, but the memories remain as vivid as ever. I've tried to move on and build a new life for myself, but the shadow of the Wendigo still looms large in my mind. I've written down my experiences, hoping that someday someone will believe me, that they'll understand the danger that lurks in the dark places of the world. But for now, I keep my story to myself, a secret burden I carry alone. Sometimes on dark nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself wondering, did I really kill the Wendigo? Or is it still out there, waiting, watching, ready to resume the hunt? I don't know if I'll ever have an answer to that question, but I do know one thing. I'll never set foot in those woods again. To those who might read this and dismiss it as the ravings of a madman, I say, pray that you never have to face what I faced. Pray that you never learn firsthand that the monsters of legend are all too real. And if you find yourself in the deep woods and you hear that heavy breathing, that rattling sound that chills you to your very soul, run, and don't look back, because the Wendigo is hungry and the hunt never truly ends. The dense canopy of evergreens loomed overhead, filtering the late afternoon sunlight into a dim green-tinged glow. I adjusted the straps of my backpack, feeling the weight of supplies and equipment settle more comfortably across my shoulders. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the sterile office environment I had left behind in Seattle. My name is Liam Crawford. I'm 32 years old, recently divorced, and desperately in need of a change of scenery. That's how I found myself at the trailhead of the Cascade Mountain Trail, ready to embark on a week-long solo camping trip. As a software engineer, I spent most of my days hunched over a keyboard, my world confined to lines of code on a glowing screen. But out here, surrounded by towering trees and rugged terrain, I felt a glimmer of the reset I'd been craving. I double-checked my backpack one last time: water purification tablets, first aid kit, map, compass, flashlight, extra batteries, all present and accounted for. My ex-wife Megan always teased me about my obsessive planning, but out here, that attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. The thought of Megan sent a familiar pang through my chest. 2 years of marriage ended in a flurry of arguments and cold silences. This trip was as much about escaping those memories as it was about reconnecting with nature. Taking a deep breath, I started down the trail. The path was well maintained at first, winding through stands of Douglas fir and western red cedar. I passed a few day hikers heading back to their cars, exchanging brief nods of acknowledgement. Their cheerful chatter faded quickly, replaced by the subtle sounds of the forest. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the soft crunch of pine needles under my boots. As the afternoon wore on, the trail gradually became narrower and less defined. The terrain grew more challenging, with exposed roots and loose rocks demanding my full attention. I welcomed the physical exertion, feeling the tension in my muscles slowly unwind as I focused on each step. Despite the serenity of my surroundings, a nagging sense of unease began to creep over me. Perhaps it was the gradual dimming of the light as evening approached, or the way the forest seemed to close in around me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I paused, listening intently, but heard nothing beyond the usual forest ambience. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, shaking off the paranoia. "This is exactly why you came out here. To clear your head." I pushed on, determined to reach my planned campsite before nightfall. The map showed a small clearing near a stream about a mile ahead. As I hiked, I tried to focus on the beauty around me, the intricate patterns of lichen on tree trunks, the delicate unfurling of fern fronds, and the occasional flash of a deer's white tail in the distance. But as the light continued to fade, casting long shadows across the forest floor, that creeping sense of unease returned. The trees seemed to loom larger, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made me flinch, my imagination conjuring unseen threats lurking just beyond my peripheral vision. Relief washed over me as I finally reached the clearing. It was smaller than I'd hoped, but it would do. I quickly set about making camp, the familiar routine of pitching my tent and organizing my gear, helping to calm my frayed nerves. As I worked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something was out there watching and waiting. With my tent secured and a small campfire crackling, I settled in for the night. The warmth of the fire and the star-studded sky overhead should have been comforting. But instead, the dancing shadows and the vast darkness beyond my little circle of light only heightened my anxiety. I tried to rationalize my fears. I was an experienced hiker, well prepared for this trip. There was nothing in these woods that I couldn't handle. And yet, as I crawled into my sleeping bag, my hand lingered on the zipper of the tent, making sure it was securely closed. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by starts and sudden awakenings at every nocturnal sound. And through it all, that persistent sensation of being watched never quite faded, leaving me to wonder what terrors the coming days might bring. The next morning dawned gray and misty. I emerged from my tent, muscles aching from the previous day's hike and the restless night. As I prepared a meager breakfast of instant oatmeal, I tried to shake off the lingering unease that had plagued me since entering the forest. I broke camp efficiently, eager to put some distance between myself and the clearing where I'd felt so exposed. The trail continued to wind deeper into the wilderness, becoming increasingly rugged. The mist clung to the trees, transforming familiar shapes into looming spectral forms. As I hiked, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, startling at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual birdsong and chittering of small animals. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. By midday, the mist had burned off, but the sky remained overcast, casting everything in a flat grayish light. I paused to consult my map, realizing with a jolt that I'd covered far less ground than I planned. The constant state of alertness was taking its toll, slowing my pace to a crawl. As I stood there studying the map, a twig snapped loudly somewhere behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but saw nothing but trees and undergrowth. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved just beyond my line of sight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the oppressive silence. "Is anyone there?" No response came, but as I turned back to the trail, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I quickened my pace, no longer stopping to admire the scenery or take in my surroundings. All I wanted was to reach my next campsite in the relative safety it had promised. The day wore on, each step feeling heavier than the last. The trail seemed to twist and turn back on itself. Landmarks I thought I recognized appeared again and again. Was I going in circles? I checked my compass frantically, but it showed I was still heading in the right direction. As twilight began to fall, I finally reached the small lake where I had planned to make camp. But instead of the peaceful scene I had imagined, the lake looked dark and forbidding. Its still surface reflected the gathering gloom like a black mirror. I set up my tent with shaking hands, constantly glancing around, certain that at any moment I would see whatever had been stalking me all day. But the forest remained still and silent, offering no answers to my growing fear. That night, as I huddled in my sleeping bag, I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound just outside my tent. I held my breath, straining my ears. It circled the tent once, twice, 3 times before fading away into the darkness. Sleep eluded me entirely, leaving me to stare wide-eyed at the tent ceiling, jumping at every sound until dawn finally broke. The third day of my trip dawned cold and clear. I emerged from my tent, blurry-eyed and exhausted from another sleepless night. The lake's surface was shrouded in mist, creating an otherworldly scene that did little to ease my growing sense of dread. As I forced down a breakfast bar, my mind raced with possibilities. What had I heard last night? A curious animal, another hiker, or something else entirely? The rational part of my brain insisted it was nothing to worry about, but a deeper, more primal instinct screamed that I was in danger. I broke camp quickly, eager to put distance between myself and whatever had visited in the night. The trail led away from the lake, climbing steadily into more mountainous terrain. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the breathtaking views of distant peaks and valleys. But now, every overlook felt exposed, every shadow concealing potential threats. As the day wore on, my paranoia grew. I began to see faces in the gnarled bark of trees, hear whispers in the rustling of leaves. More than once I spun around, certain I'd caught a glimpse of something moving just out of sight. But each time I was met with nothing but the endless expanse of forest. By mid-afternoon, I realized I had veered off the main trail. The path I was following grew increasingly faint, choked with undergrowth. I consulted my map and compass, trying to regain my bearings, but nothing looked familiar. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Panic began to set in as I realized I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. The sun, hidden behind a thick canopy, offered no guidance. As I stumbled through the underbrush, my foot caught on a hidden root, sending me sprawling to the ground. I lay there for a moment, the taste of dirt in my mouth, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. When I pushed myself up, I froze. There, pressed into the soft earth, just inches from my face, was a footprint. But it wasn't mine, and it certainly wasn't human. It was large, with distinct claw marks at the end of each toe. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Whatever had made that print was big, and it was close. I grabbed my backpack and ran, no longer caring about finding the trail, driven only by the desperate need to get away. As darkness fell, I found myself in a small ravine. Exhausted and terrified, I wedged myself into a crevice between two large boulders. It wasn't much shelter, but it was the best I could do. I didn't dare light a fire, instead huddling in the darkness, jumping at every sound. Throughout the long night, I heard it moving in the forest above me, heavy footsteps, the crack of breaking branches, and once a low, rumbling growl that sent ice through my veins. I pushed myself farther into the crevice, praying that whatever was out there would find me. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, the sounds faded away. But the fear remained, a constant companion that I knew would never leave me as long as I remained in these cursed woods. The fourth day began with a sense of grim determination. I had to find my way back to civilization, away from whatever was stalking me through this forest. I emerged from my makeshift shelter, my muscles aching from the awkward position I'd maintained all night. I oriented myself as best I could, choosing a direction that I hoped would lead me back to the main trail. As I hiked, I remained hyper-vigilant, every sense straining for signs of danger. The forest seemed different now, more sinister. The very air felt thick with malevolence. Around midday, I stumbled upon a small stream. Relief washed over me. This could lead me back to the lake, and from there I might be able to find the trail again. I followed the water's course, picking my way carefully over slippery rocks. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just another shadow, a trick of the light filtering through the leaves. But as I focused, the shape solidified into something that made my blood run cold. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with a body that seemed to be a twisted amalgamation of human and animal features. Its arms were long and gangly, ending in hands tipped with wicked claws. Matted fur covered most of its body, but patches of sickly pale skin showed through in places. Its face was the stuff of nightmares. A elongated snout filled with jagged teeth, eyes that glowed with an unnatural yellowish light, ears that twitched and swiveled, homing in on my position. For a moment, we both stood frozen, sizing each other up. Then, with a speed that belied its awkward appearance, it lunged toward me. I turned and ran, blind panic giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping in my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear it pursuing, its heavy breathing and the crack of breaking branches spurring me to even greater speed. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that frenzied flight. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but still I pushed on, driven by pure animalistic fear. Finally, I burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. Ahead, I could see a sheer cliff face. Desperation drove me forward, and I began to climb, fingers scrabbling for purchase on the rough stone. I had ascended perhaps 20 feet when I heard it enter the clearing below. I pressed myself against the rock face, hardly daring to breathe. I could hear it moving around, sniffing the air. Then, to my horror, I heard the scrape of claws on stone. It was climbing after me. With renewed energy born of terror, I climbed higher. My hands were bleeding, nails torn and broken, but I barely felt the pain. All that mattered was escaping the monster below. I reached a narrow ledge and pulled myself up, collapsing against the cliff wall. Looking down, I saw the creature, now only feet below me. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and it let out a bone-chilling howl that echoed across the valley. In that moment, staring into the face of something that should not exist, I felt my grip on reality beginning to slip. This couldn't be happening. Monsters weren't real. And yet here I was, faced with undeniable proof that everything I thought I knew about the world was wrong. As the creature reached for the ledge, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a loose rock and hurled it down with all my strength. It struck the monster squarely in the face, causing it to lose its grip. With a shriek of rage and pain, it fell, crashing through branches until it hit the ground below with a sickening thud. I didn't wait to see if it would get up. I turned and continued climbing, driven by adrenaline and the desperate need to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. I don't know how long I climbed. My world narrowed to the rock face in front of me. Every handhold of victory, every foot of elevation gained a small measure of safety. By the time I finally pulled myself onto a wider ledge, my arms were shaking with exhaustion, my fingers raw and bleeding. I collapsed, gasping for breath, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. Part of me wanted to believe it had all been a hallucination, a product of stress and isolation. But the pain in my battered body and the vivid memory of those glowing eyes told me it had been all too real. As the adrenaline wore off, the full impact of what had happened hit me. I curled into a ball, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief, fear, and utter disbelief. Sobs racked my body as I struggled to process the impossible encounter. Hours passed before I felt capable of moving again. Night had fallen, bringing with it a bone-deep chill. I was exposed on the ledge with no shelter or supplies. My backpack with all my food and equipment had been lost in the frantic flight through the forest. I took stock of my situation. I was injured, though nothing seemed broken. I had no food, no water, and no idea where I was. And somewhere below, a monster that defied explanation might still be hunting me. The gravity of my predicament was overwhelming. Sleep was out of the question. Endless sound, the whisper of wind through trees, the occasional cry of a night bird sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept expecting to see those glowing eyes appear over the edge of the ledge, to feel clawed hands grabbing at me in the darkness. As the night wore on, my thoughts turned increasingly dark. Would anyone ever find me up here? Had I simply traded a quick death for a slow one of exposure and starvation? And if I did somehow survive, who would believe my story? The first light of dawn found me huddled against the cliff face, shivering and mentally exhausted. But with the light came a renewed determination to survive. I had faced the impossible and lived. I just had to find my way back to civilization. Carefully, I began to explore the ledge. It extended further than I had realized in the darkness, wrapping around the face of the cliff. As I followed it, I discovered that it gradually widened, eventually opening onto a rough trail that seemed to lead down the mountain. Hope surged within me. This had to lead somewhere. People had made this trail, which meant there was a chance of finding help. With no other options, I began the arduous descent. The going was slow. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snapping twig, sent me into a panic. More than once I found myself pressing against the rocky wall of the cliff, my heart pounding as I scanned the forest for signs of pursuit. But no glowing eyes appeared. No inhuman howls echoed through the trees. As the day wore on, and I put more distance between myself and the site of the encounter, I began to feel a tentative sense of safety. By late afternoon, my legs were shaking with fatigue, my throat parched, and my stomach cramping with hunger. But then, just as I was considering finding a place to hole up for another night, I heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, the distant rumble of a vehicle engine. Renewed energy surged through me. I quickened my pace, following the sound. The trail widened, showing more signs of use. Then, finally, I emerged onto a dirt road. I collapsed to my knees, overcome with relief. I was back in the world of humans, away from the nightmare that lurked in the deep woods. As I heard the engine sound growing closer, I stood on shaky legs and prepared to flag down my salvation. But even as hope filled me, a nagging doubt remained. Memory of what I had seen, of what had hunted me, would never fade. And I knew that I could never look at a forest the same way again. Never shake the feeling that just beyond the veil of normalcy, unimaginable horrors await. The vehicle that appeared around the bend was an old pickup truck, driven by a grizzled man who introduced himself as Frank, a local ranger. His eyes widened as he took in my battered appearance and the wild look in my eyes. "Good Lord, son, what happened to you?" he asked as he helped me into the passenger seat. I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. How could I possibly describe what I'd been through? Who would believe me? So instead, I mumbled something about getting lost and falling down a ravine. Frank nodded sympathetically, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. As he drove us towards the ranger station, he peppered me with questions. Where had I started my hike? How long had I been out there? Did I need medical attention? I answered as best I could, my mind still reeling from the abrupt transition back to normalcy. At the ranger station, I was given water, food, and a chance to clean up. A paramedic checked me over, tending to my various cuts and scrapes. All the while, I could hear Frank on the phone, presumably reporting my rescue. As my physical needs were taken care of, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was safe now, away from the terror that had stalked me through the forest, but the memory of what I'd seen remained vivid and haunting even in the brightly lit and civilized environment of the ranger station. When the local sheriff arrived to take my statement, I found myself hesitating again. How could I explain what had really happened without sounding completely insane? In the end, I stuck to a sanitized version of events. I had gotten lost, panicked, and injured myself trying to find my way back. I could see skepticism in the sheriff's eyes, but he seemed willing to accept my story, likely attributing my obvious trauma to the ordeal of being lost in the wilderness. As night fell, I was driven to a small motel in the nearest town. The ranger service had contacted my emergency contact, my sister Kate, and she was on her way to pick me up. Left alone in the motel room, I found myself jumping at every sound, constantly checking the locks on the doors and windows. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. I dreamed of glowing eyes in the darkness, of clawed hands reaching for me, of an inhuman howl that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality. I awoke in a cold sweat, with the first light of dawn peeking through the curtains. For a moment, disoriented, I thought I was back in the forest. The panic that gripped me was so intense it took several minutes of repeating to myself, "You're safe, you're in a motel, it's over," before I could calm down. Kate arrived later that morning, her face etched with worry. As soon as she saw me, she enveloped me in a tight hug. "Liam, oh my God, I was so worried," she said.
What happened out there?
Again, I found myself unable to voice the truth. Instead, I broke down the stress and fear of the past few days finally overwhelming me. Kate held me as I sobbed, murmuring reassurances and promising that everything would be okay. As we drove back to Seattle, I stared out the window at the passing landscape. The forest that had once seemed beautiful and inviting now looked ominous, hiding untold horrors behind the veil of leaves and branches. I shuddered, turning away from the view. Kate kept glancing at me worriedly, clearly sensing that there was more to my story than I was letting on. But she didn't push. Instead, she filled the silence with updates on her life and her family, a lifeline of normalcy that I clung to desperately. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I took time off work, citing my ordeal in the woods as a need for recovery. My colleagues sent well wishes and casseroles, treating me like someone who had survived a terrible accident, in a way I suppose I had. But as the physical wounds healed, the mental scars only seemed to deepen. I couldn't sleep without the lights on, constantly startling awake at the slightest sound. The sight of trees or densely wooded areas would send me into a panic attack. I stopped going to the park near my apartment, taking the long way around to avoid it entirely. Kate, bless her, tried her best to help. She stayed with me for the first week, making sure I ate and gently encouraging me to talk about what happened. But how could I explain the inexplicable? How could I describe the creature I'd seen without sounding completely insane? Eventually, at Kate's insistence, I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Lydia Churn was patient and understanding, never pushing too hard as I slowly opened up about my experience. But even with her, I couldn't bring myself to describe the creature in detail. Instead, I talked about feeling hunted, about the paralyzing fear and the sense that something unnatural was stalking me through the woods. It's not uncommon for the mind to create vivid hallucinations in situations of extreme stress, Dr. Chin explained gently. Especially in isolation, our brains can interpret ordinary stimuli in extraordinary ways. I nodded, wanting to believe her. It would be so much easier if it had all been in my head. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing yellow eyes and heard that bone-chilling howl. No hallucination could be that visceral and terrifying. As the weeks turned into months, I slowly began to piece my life back together. I returned to work, though I struggled to focus on coding as my mind kept drifting back to the forest. I forced myself to socialize, to go through the motions of normal life, but I felt disconnected, as if part of me was still trapped on that mountain, forever running from an unstoppable predator. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself searching online for any reports of strange creatures in the Cascade Mountains. Most of what I found was clearly fictional, campfire stories and local legends. But buried in forums and obscure websites, I found accounts that made my blood run cold. Hikers described inhuman footprints, campers recounted eerie howls that didn't match any known animal, blurry photos showed something tall and misshapen moving between trees. I became obsessed, spending hours each night diving deeper into these accounts. Were there others out there who had seen what I had seen, who had faced the impossible and lived to tell about it? The more I read, the more convinced I became that I wasn't alone in my experience. But with this growing certainty came a new fear. If the creature was real, if there were potentially more of them out there, what did that mean for the world as I knew it? How many other impossible things might be hiding just out of sight, waiting to shatter our understanding of reality? Nearly a year had passed since my encounter in the woods. On the surface, my life had returned to some semblance of normalcy. I was back at work full-time, I'd started dating again, and I'd even managed to go on a short hike in a well-populated state park without having a panic attack. But beneath the veneer of recovery, the experience continued to haunt me. My nights were still plagued by nightmares, my days punctuated by moments of paralyzing fear triggered by the smallest reminders of the forest. Always, there was the gnawing need to understand, to make sense of what had happened to me. It was this need that led me to make a decision that both terrified and exhilarated me. I was going back. Not to the exact location of my encounter, I don't think I could have faced that, but to the general area. I had been in contact with a small group of researchers and enthusiasts who investigated cryptozoological phenomena. They had been intrigued by my story, what little of it I'd been willing to share, and had invited me to join them on an expedition. The goal was to gather evidence, footprint casts, hair samples, maybe even photographic proof of the creature's existence. Part of me hoped we'd find nothing, that the whole experience could be finally laid to rest as a stress-induced hallucination. But a larger part of me needed validation. Needed to know that what I had seen was real. As I packed my gear, my hands shook. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, to cling to the safety of civilization. But I knew that if I didn't face this, I would never truly move on. The forest, and what lurked within it, would haunt me forever. The night before the expedition, I sat down at my computer and began to type. I detailed everything that had happened to me, everything I had seen and experienced. It felt cathartic finally putting it all down in words. When I finished, I saved the document and set it to be emailed to Kate if I didn't return in a week. She deserved to know the truth even if she might not believe it. As dawn broke, I shouldered my backpack and headed out to meet the research team. My heart raced, my palms sweated, but underneath the fear was a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. Whatever happened on this expedition, whatever we found or didn't find, I knew this was a turning point. No longer would I be a victim, haunted by memories and fear. I was taking control, facing the unknown head-on. As we drove towards the mountains, the forests looming ever larger on the horizon, I felt a mix of dread and determination. The creature was out there, I was sure of it, and this time I would be ready. The truth was waiting in those woods, and I was going to find it no matter the cost. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks as I stared out the cabin window, watching golden leaves dance in the wind. And it's hard to believe that just a week ago I was sitting in my cramped office cubicle, drowning in spreadsheets and deadlines. Now here I was, miles away from civilization, about to embark on a solo camping trip that would change my life forever. Now I'm Ms. River, and I'm a 32-year-old software developer from the bustling heart of Seattle. I've always been the quiet type, more comfortable with lines of code than small talk, but lately the constant hum of the city and the relentless pace of my job had started to wear me down. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a life that no longer fits. That's when I remembered the stories my grandfather used to tell me about his wilderness adventures. He'd paint vivid pictures of towering trees, babbling brooks, and starry nights unspoiled by city lights. As a child, I'd hang on his every word, imagining myself as the intrepid explorer braving the great unknown. Now, with my 33rd birthday looming on the horizon, I decided it was time to recapture that sense of wonder and adventure. I took a leave of absence from work, packed up my car, and drove to this remote cabin on the edge of the Olympic National Forest. It would serve as my base camp for a week-long solo hiking and camping expedition. As I gazed out at the sea of evergreens stretching to the horizon, a mix of excitement and apprehension churned in my stomach. I'd done my research, of course. I'd studied maps, read guidebooks, and even taken a wilderness survival course. The book knowledge is one thing. Actually, being out there alone in the vast wilderness is another matter entirely. I turned away from the window and surveyed the gear laid out on the cabin's worn wooden floor. My backpack, a top-of-the-line model I'd splurged on, sat in the center like the cornerstone of a shrine to the outdoor gods. Around it, I'd arranged everything I thought I'd need for my journey. A lightweight tent, a sub-zero sleeping bag, a water filtration system, freeze-dried meals, first aid supplies, and more. As I began to methodically pack my bag, my mind wandered to the warnings I'd received from friends and family when I told them about my plan. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" they'd asked, concern etched on their faces. What if something happens out there? I'd brushed off their worries with a confident smile, assuring them that I was prepared for anything. But now, as the reality of my situation sank in, I couldn't help but wonder if they'd been right to worry. Was I really ready for this? I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping doubts. This was exactly why I needed this trip. I'd spent too long playing it safe, letting fear hold me back. It was time to push my boundaries and rediscover the person I used to be. The wide-eyed kid who dreamed of adventure. As I finished packing, I pulled out the topo map I'd be using for navigation. My planned route would take me deep into the heart of the forest, far from any marked trails or campsites. It was ambitious, perhaps even reckless, but the thought of treading where few had gone before sent a thrill of excitement through me. I traced the path with my finger, imagining the sights and sounds that awaited me, the rustling of leaves underfoot, the cry of a distant bird, the babble of hidden stream. It all seemed so idyllic in my mind. But there was something else too, a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. I tried to rationalize it away. It was natural to feel nervous before a big adventure, right? But as I stared at the map, the vast expanse of green seemed to pulse and writhe as if hiding secrets beneath its canopy. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw something moving in the depths of the forest on the map. Dark shape, fleeting and indistinct. I blinked, and the illusion vanished. Just my imagination playing tricks on me. I told myself. I folded the map and tucked it into my pack, zipping it up with a sense of finality. There was no turning back now. As night fell, I made one last check of my gear and settled into the cabin's creaky bed. Tomorrow at first light, I would set out on my journey into the wilderness. As I lay there in the darkness, listening to the wind whisper through the trees outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me out there in the forest depths. Sleep came fitfully, plagued by dreams of shadowy figures and endless twisting paths through the woods. When I woke, the pale light of dawn was just beginning to creep through the cabin windows. It was time to begin my adventure, for better or worse. Little did I know, as I shouldered my pack and stepped out into the cool morning air, that the horrors awaiting me in the depths of the Olympic National Forest would far exceed anything my imagination could conjure. The next 7 days would test not just my physical limits, but the very fabric of my sanity, and the person who emerged from those woods, if I emerged at all, would never be the same again. The morning air was crisp and invigorating as I stepped out of the cabin, my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. I took a moment to double-check my backpack, making sure everything was secure and easily accessible. The weight of it settled comfortably on my shoulders, a reminder of the journey ahead. I pulled up my map and compass, orienting myself with the surrounding landscape. The trail that I'd chosen was about a mile north of the cabin, barely visible as a thin line staking into the dense forest. It wasn't an official trail, more of a game path that locals had mentioned in hushed tones at the general store where I'd stocked up on supplies. "You sure you want to head that way?" the grizzled shopkeeper had asked, eyeing me skeptically. "Ain't many folks go up that way. Some say the forest gets strange up there." I'd laughed it off at the time, chalking it up to small-town superstition. But now, standing at the edge of the vast wilderness, his words echoed in my mind with an ominous resonance, shaking off the unease. I set off towards the trailhead. The walk was pleasant, with early morning sunlight filtering through the trees and birds calling to each other in the canopy above. I tried to focus on the beauty around me, but my mind kept wandering to the challenges that lay ahead. I'd planned my route meticulously, plotting out each day's hike and potential campsites. The first few days would be relatively easy, following the faint trail deeper into the forest. But after that, I'd be venturing into truly untamed wilderness, relying solely on my map, compass, and wits to navigate. As I approached the trailhead, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned, half expecting to see a deer or perhaps a fox. Instead, I saw nothing but the gently swaying branches of the undergrowth. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there watching me. I hesitated at the start of the trail, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what I was about to do. Was I really prepared for this? What if something went wrong? I thought of my family, friends, and cozy apartment back in Seattle. It wasn't too late to turn back, to return to the safety and comfort of my normal life. But then I remembered why I had come here in the first place. The suffocating routine, a gnawing feeling that I was meant for something more. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. This was my chance to prove to myself that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. With a determined nod, I stepped onto the trail. The forest seemed to close in around me, the sounds of civilization fading away until all I could hear was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the whisper of wind through the trees. As I hiked, I ran through my mental checklist one last time. Water filtration system? Check. First aid kit? Check. Emergency beacon? Check. I'd even packed a small notebook and pen, planning to journal my experiences each night. The trail gradually grew steeper, and I felt a bead of sweat form on my brow despite the cool air. I welcomed the physical exertion, feeling more alive with each step I took into the unknown. After about an hour of hiking, I came to a small clearing and decided to take a brief rest. As I sat on a fallen log, sipping water and munching on a granola bar, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I scanned the tree line searching for any sign of wildlife or other hikers, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger as I gathered my things and prepared to continue. It was as if the forest itself was aware of my presence, evaluating me, judging whether I was worthy to venture deeper into its domain. As I shouldered my pack and set off once more, a gust of wind rustled through the clearing. For a moment I could have sworn I heard a voice carried on the breeze, a faint and distinct whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. It seemed to say, "Turn back, it's too late." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, but when I listened more closely, I heard nothing but the natural sounds of the forest. It must have been my imagination, I told myself, just nerves playing tricks on me. With a nervous laugh, I continued down the trail. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. As the day wore on, the initial excitement of the journey began to give way to annoying anxiety. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the undergrowth sent my heart racing. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something was following me, always just out of sight. By the time the sun began to dip below the tree line, I was exhausted both physically and mentally. I found a small clearing that seemed suitable for camping and began to set up my tent with shaking hands. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with new sounds. Owls hooted in the distance, small creatures scurried through the underbrush, and the wind whispered secrets through the leaves. I huddled in my tent, trying to convince myself that the shadows moving outside were just branches swaying in the breeze. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw twisted faces in the darkness, heard whispered voices calling my name. When I finally drifted off in the early hours of morning, my dreams were filled with endless forests and shadowy figures always lurking just out of sight. I awoke with a start, disoriented and drenched in sweat. As reality slowly came into focus, I realized with a sinking feeling that my journey had only just begun. Whatever horrors awaited me in the depths of this forest, I had no choice but to face them head on. With trembling hands, I reached for my journal and began to write, desperately clinging to this last vestige of normalcy as the wilderness closed in around me. The pale light of dawn filtered through the thin fabric of my tent, rousing me from a fitful sleep. For a moment I lay still, trying to orient myself. The events of the previous day came rushing back along with a fresh wave of anxiety. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The forest was shrouded in mist, giving it an otherworldly appearance. Dew calmed to every surface, making the world sparkle in the early morning light. It was beautiful in a haunting sort of way. As I began to break camp, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig, sent my heart racing. I tried to focus on the task at hand, methodically packing my gear and erasing all traces of my presence. Once everything was packed, I pulled out my map and compass to plan the day's route. According to my calculations, I should reach the edge of the marked trail by midday. After that, I'd be venturing into truly uncharted territory. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Was I really ready for this? But I'd come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, I shouldered my pack and set off into the misty forest. The first few hours of hiking were uneventful. The trail, though faint, was still visible, winding its way through the dense undergrowth. I tried to focus on the beauty around me, the towering trees, the vibrant moss covering every surface, the occasional glimpse of a deer or squirrel. But as the day wore on, the forest began to change. The trees grew older, their trunks twisted and gnarled. The undergrowth became denser, obscuring the trail. More than once, I had to backtrack after losing my way. By midday, the trail had disappeared entirely. I found myself in a small clearing surrounded by ancient trees that seemed to loom over me disapprovingly. This was it, the point of no return. From here on out, I'd be relying solely on my map and compass to navigate. As I sat on a fallen log, munching on a protein bar and studying my map, a sound caught my attention. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rustle of leaves in the wind. But it grew louder, more distinct. Whispers. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers seemed to be coming from all around me, overlapping and intertwining until I couldn't make out individual words. But the tone was clear, urgent, warning. I sprang to my feet, spinning in a circle as I tried to locate the source of the sound. But there was nothing, just trees, shadows, and the ever-present mist. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the vast forest. "Is anyone there?" The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. For a long moment I stood there, straining my ears for any sound. Then, from somewhere deep in the forest, came a single, chilling sound. Laughter. It was unlike any laughter I'd ever heard before, low and guttural, more animal than human. The laughter echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Panic seized me. Without thinking, I grabbed my pack and ran, crashing through the undergrowth with no regard for direction or stealth. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I kept running, driven by pure primal fear. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours, but eventually exhaustion won out over fear, and I collapsed against the trunk of a massive tree, gasping for breath. As my pulse slowly returned to normal, reason began to reassert itself. I panicked, let my imagination run wild. There had to be a logical explanation for what I'd heard. Perhaps it was just the wind, or some kind of animal I wasn't familiar with. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. Whatever I'd heard in that clearing, it wasn't natural. And now, thanks to my blind flight, I was hopelessly lost. I pulled out my map and compass with shaking hands trying to get my bearing. But nothing looked familiar. The trees all blended together and the mist seemed to have thickened, obscuring any landmarks I might have used to orient myself. As the reality of my situation sank in, a wave of despair washed over me. I was alone, lost in an ancient forest that seemed to have a malevolent will of its own. Night was approaching, and with it, who knew what horrors? I knew I needed to find shelter to make camp before darkness fell. But as I gathered my courage and prepared to move on, a twig snapped behind me. I whirled around my heart and my throat. There, at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of something that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. A figure tall and gaunt, its body twisted in impossible ways. It stood perfectly still, half hidden behind a tree. Its eyes, they glowed with an unholy light, fixed directly on me. I blinked, and it was gone. Just another shadow in a forest full of shadows. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that my journey had taken a turn into territory far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. With trembling hands, I picked up my pack and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. As the last light of day faded from the sky, I ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, praying that I would live to see another dawn. The next few days passed in a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. Pushed myself to the limit, hiking from dawn to dusk, desperately trying to find my way back to familiar territory. But the forest seemed to shift and change around me, landmarks disappearing and reappearing in impossible ways. My supplies were running low, and I'd been forced to rely on my rudimentary foraging skills to supplement my dwindling rations. Every berry I ate, every stream I drank from, filled me with dread. What if they were contaminated? What if the forest itself was poisoning me? Sleep became a luxury I could ill afford. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted figure, its glowing eyes boring into my soul. I dozed in fits and starts, never fully letting my guard down. On what I estimated to be the 5th day of my ordeal, I stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail. Hope surged through me. Perhaps this would lead me back to civilization, to safety. I followed the trail for hours, my spirits lifting with each step. But as the day wore on, I began to notice strange things along the path. Carvings in the trees, unlike any I'd ever seen before. Crude structures made of sticks and bones hung from branches like macabre wind chimes, and always the feeling of being watched. As dusk approached, I came to a clearing that stopped me in my tracks. In the center stood a circle of standing stones, each easily twice my height. They were covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when I looked at them directly. I knew I should turn back, that nothing good could come from this place. But an irresistible compulsion drew me forward. As I stepped into the circle, the air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. That's when I heard it again, the whispers. But this time I could make out words. "Welcome, wanderer," they seemed to say. "We've been waiting for you." I spun around, searching for the source of the voices, and that's when I saw them. Thousands of eyes gleaming in the darkness beyond the clearing. Eyes that belonged to things that had no right to exist in this or any world. A scream built in my throat, but before I could release it, the world tilted sideways. Colors bled together, sounds distorted, and I felt myself falling. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. I was back in my tent, my sleeping bag twisted around me like a straitjacket. Had it all been a dream? But as I sat up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Clutched in my hand was a small, smooth stone covered in the same writhing symbols I'd seen in my dream, or vision, or whatever it had been. I scrambled out of the tent, desperate for fresh air. The forest around me looked normal in the pale morning light, but I knew now that appearances could be deceiving. Whatever was out there, whatever had lured me to this god-forsaken place, it was toying with me now. As I stood there trying to calm my ragged breathing, a twig snapped in the underbrush behind me. I whirled around expecting to see some nightmarish creature emerging from the shadows. Instead, I saw a man. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He leaned heavily on a gnarled walking stick, regarding me with a mixture of pity and resignation. "You shouldn't have come here, son," he said, his voice gravelly and tired. "This forest, it doesn't like outsiders." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the old man's form seemed to flicker and distort. For a split second, I saw something else standing in his place, something ancient and terrible with too many limbs and eyes that burned with eldritch fire. I blinked and the old man was back looking at me with concern. "You are right there, you look like you've seen a ghost." I managed to stammer out a response asking him who he was and what he was doing here. He introduced himself as Frank, a former park ranger who'd retired to these woods years ago. "I try to warn folks who wander in too deep," he explained, "but let's don't listen, or worse, they can't hear me at all." As we talked, Frank filled me in on the history of the forest, tales of native tribes who considered this place sacred and forbidden, settlers who'd vanished without a trace, and strange phenomena that seemed to center around the standing stones I'd seen in my vision. "Something lives in these woods," Frank said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Something old and hungry. It feeds on fear, despair, and once it's got its hooks in you, it never really lets go." I wanted to dismiss his words as the ramblings of a crazy old hermit. But after what I'd seen and experienced, I knew better. The terror I'd been holding at bay for days came crashing over me in a wave. Frank must have seen the panic in my eyes because he gripped my shoulder firmly. "Listen to me, son. You've got a choice to make now. You can try to find your way out of here, back to the world you knew, or..." He trailed off, his eyes growing distant. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming deeper and more resonant. "Or you can embrace what the forest is offering you. Become part of something greater than yourself, transcend your humanity, and join us in eternity." As he spoke those final words, Frank's form began to shift. Frank's form continued to shift and warp before my eyes, his features melting and reforming into something inhuman. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the transformation unfold. Where the old man had stood moments before, there now was a towering, grotesque figure. Its body was a twisted mass of bark and flesh, with too many limbs sprouting from its torso at impossible angles. Its face, if you could call it that, was a writhing mass of tentacles, surrounding a maw filled with needle-sharp teeth. I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead. The forest around me seemed to come alive, branches reaching out to grab at my clothes, roots rising from the earth to trip me. I could hear Frank, or whatever he had become, moving behind me, his footsteps shaking the ground. "You can't escape us," the creature's voice boomed, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "The forest has chosen you. Embrace your destiny." I ran blindly through the woods, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning with each desperate breath. I didn't know where I was going, I only knew I had to get away from the monstrosity pursuing me. As I crashed through a dense thicket, I suddenly found myself on the edge of a steep ravine. I skidded to a stop, nearly losing my balance and plummeting into the darkness below. The sound of rushing water echoed up from the depths, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I turned to face my pursuer, knowing I was trapped. The creature that had been Frank emerged from the tree line, its tentacles writhing in anticipation. Behind it, I could see other shapes moving in the shadows, more monstrosities drawn by the chase. "No more running," the Frank creature said, its voice a horrifying blend of the old man's gruff tones and something altogether alien. "Join us willingly, or we'll take you by force. Either way, you'll become part of the forest." I backed up as far as I dared, feeling loose stones shift under my feet at the edge of the ravine. My mind raced, searching desperately for a way out of this nightmare. That's when I remembered the emergency flare in my pack, a last-ditch signaling device I'd brought along in case of emergency. With shaking hands, I fumbled for the flare, praying I could light it before the creatures reached me. As my fingers closed around the cool metal cylinder, I saw the Frank creature lunge forward, its tentacles stretching out to grab me. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I had a choice to make: risk being captured by these monsters, or take a literal leap of faith into the unknown depths of the ravine. I chose the ravine. As I fell backward in empty space, I raised the flare gun and fired. The night exploded into brilliant red light, momentarily blinding me. I heard the creatures shriek in pain and anger, their inhuman voices fading as I plummeted into darkness. The last thing I remember before hitting the water was a sense of weightlessness and the absurd thought that whatever happened next, at least I'd escape the horrors waiting for me in the forest above. I hit the water with bone-jarring force, the icy current immediately sweeping me away. I flailed desperately, fighting to keep my head above water as I was tossed about like a rag doll. The roar of the rapids was deafening, drowning out everything else, including my own terrified screams. I didn't know how long I was at the mercy of the river. Time lost all meaning as I struggled to survive, gasping for air between waves, my body battered against rocks and debris. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the current slackened and I found myself being washed into a calmer stretch of water. With the last of my strength, I managed to drag myself onto a muddy bank. I lay there for what felt like hours, coughing up water and shivering uncontrollably. Every part of my body ached, and I was pretty sure I had at least a few broken ribs. As my senses slowly returned, I became aware of my surroundings. All in some sort of cavern, dimly lit by phosphorescent fungi growing on the walls. The sound of the river echoed in the distance, but here in this underground grotto, all was eerily still. I struggled to my feet, wincing at the pain that shot through my battered body. My pack was gone, lost to the river along with most of my supplies. All I had left were the clothes on my back and the small stone with the strange symbols that I'd found after my vision at the standing stones. As I stood there trying to decide what to do next, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices echoing from somewhere deeper in the cavern. They weren't human voices, but rather a chittering, insectile sound that set my teeth on edge. I knew I couldn't stay where I was. Whatever those things were, they were getting closer. I picked a direction at random and started moving, using the cavern wall for support as I limped along. The phosphorescent fungi provided just enough light to see by, casting everything in a sickly green glow. As I made my way deeper into the cave system, I began to notice strange markings on the walls, crude pictographs that seemed to depict some sort of ritual or transformation. The voices behind me grew louder and more frenzied. I quickened my pace, ignoring the pain that flared with every step. I turned a corner and found myself face to face with a dead end. A smooth wall of rock with no way forward. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I heard my pursuers drawing nearer. Then sort of noticed something odd about the wall in front of me. There was a circular indentation about the size of my palm, covered in symbols that looked familiar. With a jolt, I realized they were the same symbols as those on the stone I'd found. Moving on instinct, I pressed the stone into the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, the wall began to move. A narrow passageway opened up, leading into darkness. I didn't hesitate. I squeezed through the opening just as I caught a glimpse of my pursuers rounding the corner behind me, twisted insectoid creatures that moved with terrifying speed. The passage sealed shut behind me, cutting off the chittering voices and plunging me into total darkness. I stumbled forward blindly, my hands outstretched, feeling my way along the rough stone walls. I don't know how long I wandered in that lightless tunnel. It could have been hours or days. My mind began to play tricks on me, conjuring up horrifying images in the darkness. More than once, I was sure I felt something brush against me, heard whispers just on the edge of hearing. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was ready to curl up and let madness take me, I saw a pinprick of light in the distance. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I pushed forward, the light growing brighter with each step. Finally, I emerged from the tunnel, blinking in the sudden brightness. I found myself on a ledge overlooking a vast underground cavern, easily the size of a football stadium. And what I saw there would haunt me for the rest of my days. The cavern was filled with creatures, hundreds, maybe thousands of them. Some looked vaguely human, others were clearly animals, and still others defied description. All of them were in various stages of transformation, their bodies twisting and reshaping themselves in grotesque ways. In the center of it all stood a massive, pulsating mass of flesh and tentacles. It radiated an aura of ancient alien intelligence that made my mind recoil. Somehow I knew I was looking at the heart of the forest, the entity that had been manipulating everything from the beginning. As I stood there, frozen in horror and awe, I felt a presence behind me, and I turned to see Frank, or what was left of him, emerging from the tunnel. "Welcome home," he said, his voice a mixture of joy and sorrow. "The transformation is about to begin." I stood on the ledge, paralyzed by the nightmarish scene before me, the cavern full of transforming creatures, the pulsating mass at its center, and Frank's words echoing in my ears. It was all too much to process. But as Frank reached out to me, his hand morphing into a twisted claw, survival instinct kicked in. I dodged his grasp and ran along the ledge, searching desperately for a way out. The ledge circled the entire cavern, spiraling downward. As I ran, I could hear Frank behind me. His footsteps grew more inhuman with each passing second. Below, the creatures in the cavern had noticed my presence. A cacophony of shrieks and howls rose up, the sound nearly driving me to my knees. I spotted a narrow crevice in the cavern wall and squeezed into it without hesitation. The rough stone scraped against my skin as I inched forward. I could hear Frank clawing at the entrance, unable to follow. The crevice twisted and turned, growing narrower with each passing moment. Just when I thought I'd be trapped there forever, crushed between indifferent stone, it opened up into a small chamber. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, and on it rested an ancient book bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. Despite every instinct screaming at me not to, I approached the pedestal. The book seemed to pulse with its own inner light. As I reached out to touch it, symbols similar to those on my stone began to glow on its cover. The air grew thick and heavy, and I felt a presence pressing against my mind. Images flashed before my eyes. The history of this place, the entity that dwelled here, the cosmic horror of its true nature. I saw how it had manipulated the forest, twisting it to its will over millennia. I saw the fate that awaited me and all the others it had lured here. An eternity of transformation, of becoming one with the alien intelligence that hungered for more vessels, more power. But I also saw something else, a way out, a ritual hidden within the pages of the book that could seal this place away. It would require a sacrifice, but it was the only chance to stop this madness from spreading beyond the forest. With shaking hands, I opened the book and began to read. The words were in no language I recognized, but somehow I understood them. As I chanted, the chamber began to shake. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling. I heard the creatures outside howling with fury and fear. They knew what I was doing, and they were desperate to stop me. But it was too late. The ritual had begun, and there was no turning back. As I spoke the final words, a blinding light filled the chamber. I felt a searing pain in my chest as if something was being torn from my very soul. The book crumbled to ash in my hands, and the world around me began to fade away. The last thing I remember is a sense of falling, of being pulled in 1,000 directions at once, and then, mercifully, darkness. I awoke to the steady beep of hospital machinery and the antiseptic smell of a recovery room. For a long moment, I lay there trying to piece together what had happened. The memories came flooding back in a rush, and I had to fight down a wave of panic. The nurse noticed I was awake and called for the doctor. What followed was a blur of tests, questions, and concerned looks. They told me I'd been found at the edge of the forest by a search and rescue team, severely dehydrated and babbling incoherently about monsters and rituals. I'd been missing for over 2 weeks. My family and friends had been frantic with worry. As I lay there listening to the doctor explain my physical condition, I wondered how I could possibly explain what had really happened. In the end, I didn't try. Who would believe me? I let them think I'd gotten lost, suffered from hallucinations due to dehydration and stress. It was easier that way. But I need the truth. The nightmares that plagued me every night. The way my skin crawled whenever I saw a forest. The strange symbols that sometimes appeared in my vision when I closed my eyes. All of it was real. As the days passed and I grew stronger, I began to notice other changes. Sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I catch glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. Twisted shapes lurking in shadows, eyes watching me from impossible angles. But when I turned to look directly, they'd vanish. I could hear whispers on the wind, fragments of conversations not meant for human ears. And sometimes, when I touched certain objects, I get flashes of their history, of the hands that had held them before. The doctors could explain the strange scars that had appeared on my body, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when no one was looking directly at them. They prescribed therapy and medication, but nothing could erase the knowledge of what I'd experienced. As I was finally released from the hospital, I knew I could never go back to my old life. The person I had been died in that forest, sacrificed in a ritual I still didn't fully understand. What emerged was something different, not quite human, but not fully transformed either. I spent the next few months trying to research what had happened to me, searching for any information about the forest and the entity that dwelled there. But every lead I found ended in dead ends or more questions. The forest itself had changed. Reports came in of hikers experiencing lost time, of strange lights seen deep in the woods. The area was eventually closed off, declared too dangerous for the public. I knew it was only a temporary solution. Whatever I had done in that underground chamber had sealed away the worst of the entity's power, but it wasn't gone. It was patient and had eternity to wait. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had a role yet to play. The ritual had changed me, given me knowledge and abilities I was only beginning to understand. I didn't know if I was meant to be a guardian against the darkness, or if I was slowly transforming into something that would eventually return to the forest's embrace. All I knew was that my journey wasn't over. The horrors I'd witnessed in those woods were just the beginning. There were other places like it out there, other entities waiting in the dark corners of the world. And somehow, for better or worse, I was now a part of that world. The person who entered that forest was gone. What emerged was something new, something that straddled the line between humanity and the unknown horrors that lurked just beyond our perception. As I packed my bags and prepared to leave town, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For a moment I saw something else looking back at me, something with too many eyes and a mouth full of secrets. I blinked and it was gone, but I know it would be back. The forest had left its mark on me, and no matter how far I ran, a part of me would always belong to those dark woods and the mysteries they contained. With a deep breath, I shouldered my pack and walked out the door, leaving behind the last vestiges of my old life. Whatever came next, whatever horrors or wonders awaited me, I knew one thing for certain: the real journey was just beginning. The gentle hum of my laptop fan was the only sound in my dimly lit apartment as I scrolled through another mind-numbing day of remote work. It was 2025, and at 28 years old, Liam Forrester felt like I was slowly withering away in the artificial glow of my screens. My eyes drifted to the framed photo on my desk, a snapshot from happier times. It showed a younger version of myself, grinning widely atop a mountain peak. Arms spread wide as if embracing the vast wilderness before me. That was before the accident, before the fear set in. A notification pinged, jolting me back to reality. It was a message from my therapist, Dr. Amelia Hayes. Liam, I hope you're doing well. Have you given any thought to our last session? Modern exposure therapy can be a powerful tool in overcoming your fears. Small steps. I sighed, running a hand through my unkempt hair. It had been 3 years since the incident that left me with a crippling fear of the outdoors. 3 years since I'd felt the crunch of leaves underfoot or breathed in the crisp mountain air. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in, but the thought of stepping outside sent my heart racing. My gaze drifted back to the photo and something stirred within me. A forgotten longing, a whisper of the person I used to be. Before I could talk myself out of it, I found myself replying to Dr. Hayes. I've been thinking about taking a camping trip, just a short one. Maybe it's time. The moment I hit send, a wave of anxiety washed over me. What was I thinking? Me camping after everything that happened? But a small part of me, the part that still yearned for adventure, felt a flicker of excitement. Over the next few days, I threw myself into planning. I scoured online forums for beginner-friendly trails, ordered new gear, my old equipment long since donated, and even reached out to my old hiking buddy, Trevor. Dude, are you serious? Trevor's voice crackled through my phone speaker, a mix of surprise and excitement. I never thought I'd see the day. Count me in. As the trip drew nearer, my anxiety ebbed and flowed like the tide. One moment I'd be filled with determination, the next gripped by panic. The night before our departure, I barely slept, my mind conjuring images of all the things that could go wrong. Morning came, and with it, a knock at my door. I opened it to find Trevor, his familiar grin, a stark contrast to the nervous energy thrumming through my body. Ready for an adventure, city boy? He teased, eyeing my meticulously packed backpack. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the tremor in my hands, as ready as I'll ever be. As we loaded up Trevor's beat-up Jeep, I cast one last glance at my apartment building. For 3 years it had been my sanctuary, my safe haven. Now it felt like a prison I was finally breaking free from. The drive to the trailhead was a blur of nervous small talk and stunning scenery. As buildings gave way to trees and the air grew fresher, I felt a curious mix of terror and exhilaration. Finally, we arrived at the Cedar Grove trailhead. Trevor killed the engine, and for a moment we sat in silence, the enormity of what we were about to do settling over us. "You sure about this, Liam?" Trevor asked, his tone uncharacteristically serious. Lincoln turned back. No shame in it. I took a deep breath, my hand on the door handle. The forest leaned before us, a sea of green, both inviting and intimidating. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the car, to retreat to the safety of my digital world. But something else, something I thought I'd lost long ago, pushed me forward. "I'm sure," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Let's do this." As I stepped out of the car, the rich scent of pine and earth enveloped me. The ground felt alien beneath my feet, so different from the sterile floors of my apartment. A cold breeze caressed my face, carrying with it the promise of adventure and the whisper of forgotten fears. Little did I know, as Trevor and I shouldered our packs and took our first steps onto the trail, that this journey would test me in ways I could never have imagined. The forest held secrets, and not all of them were benign. But in that moment, all I felt was the thrill of facing my fears, one trembling step at a time. The trees seemed to watch as we disappeared into their midst, the trailhead and the safety of civilization fading behind us. Ahead lay the unknown, a path that would lead me back to myself or into the darkest corners of my mind. The forest enveloped us like a living, breathing entity. Towering cedars and Douglas firs stretched skyward, their branches forming a canopy that dappled the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a smell that transported me back to happier times. "You doing okay, Liam?" Trevor's voice cut through my reverie. I realized I had stopped walking, my hand pressed against the rough bark of a massive tree. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just taking it all in." We continued our hike, the well-maintained trail gradually giving way to a narrower, less traveled path. The sound of our boots crunching on fallen leaves and twigs seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed forest. As we walked, Trevor kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out various plants and birds. I was grateful for the distraction, even if I only half listened. My senses were on high alert, every snapping twig or rustling leaf sending a jolt of adrenaline through my system. "Remember that time we got lost on Mount Rainier?" Trevor laughed, recounting one of our past adventures. "Man, I thought we were goners for sure." I forced a chuckle, but the memory sent a chill down my spine. That had been a close call, but it was nothing compared to what had happened 3 years ago. The incident that had left me a shell of my former self. As the downpour on the forest grew denser, the trees pressing in closer, The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied us earlier faded, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by our labored breathing and the occasional distant cry of a hawk. "Hey, Trev," I called out, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "How much further to the campsite?" Trevor consulted his GPS. "Should be another hour or so. You holding up okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The weight of my pack seemed to increase with every step, and a nagging sense of unease had settled in the pit of my stomach. As we pushed on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. More than once I whirled around, certain I had seen movement out of the corner of my eye. But each time, there was nothing but the endless sea of trees. "Did you see that?" I asked Trevor after one such incident, my heart pounding. He paused, looking around. "See what?" I thought I saw. Never mind. I shook my head, angry at myself for letting my imagination run wild. Trevor gave me a concerned look, but said nothing. We pressed on in silence, the forest growing darker as the sun began to set. Finally, just as I was about to suggest we turn back, the trees opened up into a small clearing. A bubbling stream cut through one side, and a flat area perfect for pitching tents lay on the other. "Home sweet home," Trevor announced, dropping his pack with a groan of relief. As we set up camp, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had plagued me during our hike. This was supposed to be therapeutic, a way to face my fears. Instead, I felt more on edge than ever. With our tents pitched and a small fire crackling, we sat down to eat a simple dinner of dehydrated camping meals. The flames cast flickering shadows across the clearing, and beyond our small circle of light, the forest loomed dark and impenetrable. "You know," Trevor said between mouthfuls, "I'm really proud of you for doing this, Liam. I know it can't be easy." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thanks, Trev. I'm just glad you're here with me." As we talked, I felt some of my tension begin to ease. The familiar routine of setting up camp and sharing a meal with a friend had a calming effect. Maybe this trip wasn't such a bad idea after all, but as the fire died down and we prepared to turn in for the night, that nagging sense of unease returned. As I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with unsettling dreams. I jolted awake, heart pounding, unsure of what had disturbed my sleep. The interior of the tent was pitch black, and for a moment, panic clawed at my throat as I struggled to remember where I was. Then it came again, a sound, a whisper so faint I might have imagined it, carried on the night breeze. "Trevor," I called out softly, my voice trembling. No response. Fumbling for my flashlight, I unzipped my sleeping bag and sat up. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty space where Trevor should have been sleeping. A rustling outside the tent made me freeze. "Trevor," I called again, louder this time. "Is that you?" Silent. With shaking hands, I unzipped the tent flap and poked my head out. The clearing was bathed in silvery moonlight, casting long shadows across the ground. Trevor's tent stood silent and undisturbed. "Trevor," I shouted, fear giving my voice a sharp edge. A twig snapped in the forest beyond our campsite, and I swung my flashlight toward the sound. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, tall, unnaturally still, its features hidden in shadow. I blinked, and it was gone. Panic rising in my chest, I scrambled out of the tent, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste. The night air was cold against my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms. "Trevor, where are you?" I called out, my voice echoing in the quiet clearing. As if in response, a lull moan drifted from the direction of the stream. Without thinking, I plunged into the forest, branches whipping at my face as I ran. I found Trevor kneeling by the water's edge, retching violently. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by concern. "Jesus, Trev, you scared the hell out of me," I said, crouching beside him. "Are you okay?" He looked up at me, his face pale in the moonlight. "Sorry, man," he gasped between he. "Must have been something I ate. Didn't want to wake you." I helped him back to the campsite, my earlier fear giving way to a different kind of worry. What if Trevor was too sick to hike out tomorrow? What if we both got food poisoning? As we neared our tents, I cast one last glance over my shoulder at the dark forest. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw two pinpricks of light, like eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. Then they were gone, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. We spent the rest of the night in uneasy wakefulness. Trevor's occasional bouts of nausea punctuated the oppressive silence of the forest. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky in pale pinks and golds, we were both exhausted and on edge. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested as we broke camp. Eyeing the ash still on Trevor's face, he shook his head stubbornly. "No way. We came out here for you, Liam. I'm not letting a little stomach bug ruin that." I wanted to argue, but a part of me was relieved. Despite the terrors of the night, the thought of admitting defeat and returning to my self-imposed isolation was somehow worse. As we shouldered our packs and set off deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and every shadow held the promise of hidden dangers. But we pressed on, unaware that our real ordeal was just beginning. The trail narrowed as we pushed deeper into the wilderness, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging. Trevor, still weak from his bout of sickness, lagged behind, his usual cheerful banter replaced by labored breathing and occasional groans. "We should take a break," I called back to him, eyeing a fallen log that would serve as a decent resting spot. Trevor nodded gratefully, slumping onto the log with a heavy sigh. As I handed him my water bottle, I couldn't help but notice how pale and drawn he looked. Guilt nudged me. This trip had been my idea, after all. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested again, more forcefully this time. "You're in no shape to keep going, Trev." He shook his head stubbornly. "We're already halfway to the summit, might as well push through." Before I could argue further, a sound caught my attention. A low, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Trevor's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I shook my head, my mouth suddenly dry, probably just the wind. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The air was still, not even a whisper of a breeze stirring the leaves. As if in response to my thoughts, the sound came again, longer this time, rising and falling in a way that was almost musical. "I need to go," I said, hauling Trevor to his feet. Now, we set off at a brisk pace, no longer caring about the steepness of the trail or the weight of our packs. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. The forest seemed to change around us as we climbed higher. The trees grew more gnarled and twisted, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. Thick fog began to roll in, obscuring the path ahead and muffling all sound. "Liam," Trevor called out, his voice tight with fear. "I don't think we're on the trail anymore." I stopped, looking around in growing panic. He was right. The railroad path we had been following had disappeared, replaced by uneven ground strewn with rocks and fallen branches. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just need to backtrack a bit. We couldn't have strayed too far." But as we tried to retrace our steps, I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea which direction we had come from. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to mere feet in front of us. "We're lost," Trevor said, stating the obvious. The fear in his voice mirrored my own rising panic. I fumbled for my phone, hoping to use the GPS, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. We were miles from the nearest cell tower. "Okay, don't panic," I said, as much to myself as to Trevor. "We just need to stay calm and think this through." But even as I spoke, that eerie wailing sound came again, closer this time. It no longer sounded like the wind. It was a voice unmistakably human. Yet somehow, Trevor grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "Liam," he whispered. "There's something out there." I followed his gaze and felt my blood run cold. Through the swirling mist, I could just make out a figure standing motionless among the trees. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. Its limbs elongated and distorted. For a long moment, we stood frozen, staring at the figure. Then, slowly, it began to move towards us, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Run!" I yelled, shoving Trevor ahead of me. We plunged blindly through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. The fog seemed to part before us, only to close in again behind, cutting off any chance of retracing our steps. I could hear it behind us, not running, but moving with a swift gliding motion that covered ground far faster than we could. Risking a glance over my shoulder, I saw it getting closer. Its features still hidden in shadow, but its intent unmistakable. Suddenly, the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. I had just enough time to register the sensation of falling before I slammed into the forest floor, tumbling head over heels down a steep incline. I came to a stop at the bottom of the ravine, dazed and battered. Trevor landed beside me a moment later, groaning in pain. "Trev," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond, and in the dim light I could see blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. We were injured, lost, and being pursued by something, but we were still alive, and that meant we had a chance. As I helped Trevor to his feet, I heard that haunting wail again, echoing through the ravine. Whatever was chasing us, it was getting closer, and we were running out of places to hide. The ravine stretched out before us, a dark gash in the earth surrounded by mist. Trevor leaned heavily on me, his breathing labored and punctuated by pained grunts. "We need to find shelter," I muttered, more to myself than to Trevor. My eyes darted frantically, searching for anything that might offer protection. As if in answer to my desperate thoughts, I spotted a dark opening in the rock face to our left, a cave partially hidden by hanging vines and moss. "There," I said, steering Trevor towards it. "We can hide in there." We stumbled into the cave just as another unearthly wail echoed through the ravine. The sound seemed to reverberate off the rock walls surrounding us, making it impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. The interior of the cave was pitch black. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space larger than I had expected, stretching back into the mountain. "We should go deeper," Trevor whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. I nodded, helping him further into the cave. We made our way carefully, the uneven floor treacherous with loose rocks and sudden drops. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we came to a small chamber. It was dry and the air was still. Most importantly, it was defensible. There was only one way in or out. I had Trevor sit with his back against the wall and slumped down beside him. For a long moment, we sat in silence, listening to our ragged breathing echoing off the stone walls. "What was that thing?" Trevor finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. It looked wrong." Trevor continued, a shudder running through him like something out of a nightmare. I was about to respond when a sound froze the words in my throat. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed from the cave entrance. We pressed ourselves against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. My hand found the handle of my hunting knife, a poor weapon against whatever was out there. But it was all we had. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by a strange scraping sound, like nails on stone. Then, at the entrance to our chamber, a figure appeared. In the dim light of my fallen flashlight, I could finally see our pursuer clearly. It was humanoid but grotesquely elongated, standing easily 8 feet tall. Its skin was pale and mottled, stretched tight over an emaciated frame. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. Featureless except for 2 sunken, glowing eyes and a lipless mouth that stretched from ear to ear. For a long moment it stood there, swaying slightly, those eerie eyes fixed on us. Then it opened its mouth and let out that haunting wail we had heard in the forest. Trevor whimpered beside me, and I gripped my knife tighter, knowing it would be useless against this thing. But instead of attacking, the creature cocked its head to one side as if listening. Then, to my utter amazement, it spoke. "Why have you come here?" The voice was raspy, barely above a whisper, but undeniably human. I swallowed hard, finding my own voice. They didn't mean to trespass. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Lost," it repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes. Many become lost in these woods. Few find their way out. What are you?" Trevor blurted out, his fear momentarily overcome by curiosity. The creature's mouth stretched in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "I am the Wanderer," it said. "I've walked these forests for centuries, watching, waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked, dreading the answer. The Wanderer's eyes seemed to glow brighter, for those who would disturb the balance, for those who would bring the outside world into this sacred place. A chill ran down my spine. "We didn't mean to disturb anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just want to go home." The creature tilted its head, considering. "Home," it repeated, the word sounding foreign on its lips. "Yes, you may leave, but first you must understand." Before I could ask what it meant, the Wanderer reached out with one impossibly long arm. Its fingers, more like talons, brushed against my forehead. Suddenly, I was overwhelmed by a flood of images and sensations. I saw the forest as it had been centuries ago, pristine and untouched. I felt the pain as humans began to encroach, cutting down trees, polluting streams. And I understood the Wanderer's purpose: to protect this place, to keep it wild and free from human interference. When the visions faded, I gasped, my head spinning. Beside me, Trevor looked equally shaken. "You see now," the Wanderer said. "It wasn't a question." I nodded, unable to speak. "Go," it said, stepping back, "but remember what you have learned and never return." We didn't need to be told twice. As soon as the Wanderer disappeared into the shadows, Trevor and I scrambled to our feet and made our way out of the cave. The forest seemed different now. The oppressive fear that had gripped us earlier was gone, replaced by a profound sense of respect and unease. Every tree, every rock, felt alive and watching. "Which way?" Trevor asked as we emerged from the ravine. I closed my eyes, remembering the visions the Wanderer had shared. Somehow I knew which direction to go. "This way," I said, pointing. We walked in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. The forest seemed to part before us, guiding our steps. As the sun began to set, we emerged from the tree line, the parking lot where we left Trevor's Jeep just visible in the distance. The drive back to the city was quiet, each of us processing what we'd experienced. It wasn't until we were back in my apartment, nursing cups of strong coffee, that Trevor finally spoke. "What do we tell people?" I shook my head. "Nothing." "Who would believe us?" Trevor nodded, looking relieved. "Yeah, you're right. But Liam, what do we do now? How do we just go back to normal after that?" It was a question I'd been asking myself since we left the forest. "I don't think we can," I said slowly, "but maybe that's not a bad thing." In the weeks that followed, I found myself changed. The paralyzing fear that had kept me isolated for so long was gone, replaced by a new sense of purpose. I quit my soul-sucking job and started volunteering for environmental conservation groups. Trevor joined me, and together we worked to protect the wild places that remained. Sometimes late at night, I would dream of the forest and the wanderer. In those dreams, I saw a future where humans and nature existed in harmony, and I knew that in some small way, I was working towards that vision. The camping trip that was meant to conquer my fears had done so much more. It had shown me the true face of nature, beautiful, terrifying, and worthy of protection. And though I would never return to that particular forest, I carried its lessons with me always. As I stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights, I felt a familiar presence. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of a tall, otherworldly figure in the shadows. Then it was gone, leaving behind only a whisper on the wind. Remember, now I always would. The first rays of dawn crept through my bedroom window, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floor. I blinked away the remnants of sleep, my mind already racing with anticipation. Today is the day. After months of planning, I was finally embarking on my solo backpacking trip into the heart of the Cascade Mountains. As I swung my legs over the side of the bed, a twinge of anxiety twisted in my gut. At 32, I wasn't exactly a spring chicken anymore, and it had been years since I'd attempted anything this ambitious. But that's precisely why I needed to do this. The monotony of my IT job had been slowly suffocating me, each day blending into the next in an endless cycle of meetings and deadlines. I needed to prove to myself that I still had it in me, that spark of adventure that had defined my younger years. This trip was my chance to reconnect with nature, to challenge myself, and to escape the suffocating embrace of modern life just for a week. My gear lay neatly arranged on the floor, a testament to hours of meticulous preparation. I'd spent weeks researching the latest ultralight equipment, determined to strike the perfect balance between comfort and weight. As I began to dress, pulling on layers of high-tech synthetic fabrics, I ran through my mental checklist one last time. Tent, check. Sleeping bag, check. First aid kit, water filter, emergency beacon, check, check and check. And even sponged on a new pair of hiking boots, their stiff leather still creaking slightly as I laced them up. With everything packed and double-checked, I hoisted my backpack onto my shoulders, grimacing slightly at the weight. It was heavier than I had hoped, but I'd rather be over-prepared than caught short in the wilderness. I cast one last glance around my small apartment, a pang of something nostalgic, apprehensive tugging at my chest. The drive to the trailhead was a blur of evergreen forests and winding mountain roads. As I climbed higher into the Cascades, cell phone reception faded to nothing, and the radio crackled with increasing static until I switched it off entirely. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the steady hum of my car's engine and the occasional cry of a hawk soaring overhead. I pulled into the small gravel parking lot just as the sun was reaching its zenith. A weathered wooden sign marked the start of the Whispering Pines Trail, the peeling paint lending it an air of neglect. I shouldered my pack, its weight settling uncomfortably against my back, and took my first steps onto the narrow dirt path. The forest closed in around me almost immediately, the canopy above filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the trail and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I hiked, I felt the tension of the past few months begin to melt away. My breathing fell into a steady rhythm, and I found myself noticing small details that I would have missed in my usual rushed state. The delicate veins of a leaf, the intricate pattern of lichen on a stone, the flash of a chipmunk's tail as it darted across the path. But as the afternoon wore on and the shadows lengthened, a creeping unease began to settle over me. The trail, which had started out well-maintained, grew increasingly overgrown. Roots and rocks threatened to trip me with every step, and more than once I had to backtrack after losing the path entirely. I consulted my map and GPS, frowning at the discrepancies between what I was seeing and what should have been there. According to my route, I should have reached a small stream by now, a perfect spot to set up camp for the night. But the only water I'd encountered was a stagnant, algae-choked pond that set my teeth on edge. As twilight descended, transforming the forest into a maze of deep shadows, I was forced to admit that I was well and truly lost. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. I'd always prided myself on my navigation skills, but now, surrounded by the looming trees and encroaching darkness, I felt foolish and unprepared. With no better options, I decided to make camp where I was, in a small clearing that offered at least some visibility. As I went through the motions of setting up my tent and preparing a meager dinner of trail mix and beef jerky, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush sent my heart racing. I found myself straining my ears, convinced that I could hear something moving just beyond the ring of my headlamp's beam. But each time I whirled around, there was nothing there but shadows and silence. As I zapped myself into my tent that night, I tried to rationalize my fears. I was just tired and disoriented, I told myself. Things would look better in the morning, but as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night, a single thought kept circling through my mind. What if I wasn't as alone out here as I thought? I woke to the sound of rain pattering against the tent fly. Groggily, I fumbled for my watch. It was 5:40. The pre-dawn light filtered weakly through the nylon, casting everything in a murky gray hue. I lay there for a moment, listening to the steady drip of water and trying to gather my thoughts. The events of the previous day came rushing back along with a fresh wave of anxiety. I was lost off trail in a section of forest I didn't recognize. The smart thing would be to retrace my steps, to try and find my way back to a marked trail. But a stubborn part of me balked at the idea of giving up so easily. I'd come out here for a challenge, hadn't I? With a sigh, I unzipped my sleeping bag and began the process of breaking camp. Every movement felt stiff and awkward, my muscles protesting after a night on the hard ground. As I packed up my gear, my mind wandered to the strange noises I'd heard the night before. In the harsh light of day, they seemed less menacing. Probably just normal forest sounds amplified by my own fear and imagination. I wolfed down a breakfast of instant oatmeal and powdered coffee, grimacing at the gritty texture. As I ate, I pored over my map, trying to pinpoint my location. If my calculations were correct, there should be a ridgeline to the east that would offer a better vantage point. From there, I might be able to get my bearings and figure out how to get back on track. The rain had tapered off to a light drizzle by the time I shouldered my pack and set out. The forest floor was slick with moisture, fallen leaves clinging to my boots with every step. The heavy cloud cover made it difficult to get a clear sense of direction, but I trusted my compass and pushed on eastward. As the day wore on, the terrain became increasingly difficult. The gentle slopes gave way to steep inclines, forcing me to scramble over moss-covered boulders and through dense thickets of underbrush. More than once, I lost my footing on the slippery ground, my heart leaping into my throat as I narrowly avoided a dangerous fall. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted. My clothes were soaked through with a mixture of rain and sweat. The promised ridgeline remained frustratingly out of reach, hidden behind an endless series of false summits. Doubt began to gnaw at me. Had I made a mistake in pushing forward, or should I have tried to backtrack instead? It was then that I heard it, a sound that made me freeze in my tracks. A low, guttural growl somewhere off to my right. I held my breath, straining my ears. For a long moment, there was nothing but the soft patter of raindrops on leaves. Then I heard it again, closer this time. My mind raced through the possibilities: a bear, a mountain lion, whatever it was. It didn't sound friendly. I slowly reached for the bear spray attached to my belt, my fingers trembling slightly as I wrapped them around the canister. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught my eye. Something large and dark darted between the trees just at the edge of my vision. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing but mist and shadows. Panic seized me. All thoughts of finding the ridgeline evaporated as survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, no longer caring about direction or navigating. My only goal was to put as much distance between myself and whatever was out there as possible. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms, my lungs burning as I gasped for air, the weight of my pack throwing me off balance with every stride. Behind me, I could hear the sound of pursuit, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and that terrible growl growing ever closer. In my blind panic, I failed to notice the sharp drop-off ahead. One moment I was running, the next I was falling, tumbling head over heels down a steep embankment. Pain exploded through my body as I collided with rocks and tree roots. I came to a stop at the bottom, dazed and battered. My pack twisted awkwardly beneath me. For several long minutes I lay there, too stunned to move. Gradually I became aware of a new sound, the rush of flowing water. Blinking away the rain and tears, I realized I had landed near the bank of a swift-moving stream. With a groan, I pushed myself to my feet, wincing at the various aches and pains that made themselves known. Nothing seemed to be broken, but I was covered in scrapes and bruises. My pack had survived the fall, but several items had spilled out and been lost in the tumble. As I gathered what remained of my supplies, I cast a fearful glance back up the slope. There was no sign of whatever had been chasing me, but that did little to calm my nerves. The encounter had shaken me to my core, stripping away any remaining illusions of control or preparedness. The night was falling fast, and I knew I needed to find shelter. With no better options, I began to follow the stream downhill, hoping it would lead me to safer ground. As darkness closed in around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of my ordeal. The stream led me to a small clearing as the last vestiges of daylight faded from the sky. Exhausted and on edge, I knew I had no choice but to make camp for the night. My hands shook as I set up my tent. Every snapping twig and rustle of leaves sending jolts of adrenaline through my system. As I huddled in my sleeping bag, I took stock of my situation. I was hopelessly lost, low on supplies, and now acutely aware that I was sharing these woods with something potentially dangerous. The rational part of my brain tried to reason that it was probably just a bear or some other large animal startled by my presence. But in the depths of the night, rationality held little sway over my fears. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by long periods of tense wakefulness. Every sound from the forest seemed magnified, the hoot of an owl, the scurrying of small animals, the creaking of branches in the wind. But worse than the sounds were the moments of complete silence when the forest seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. It was during one of these silent stretches that I first heard the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind or my own imagination playing tricks on me. But as I strained my ears, I could make out what sounded like words just at the edge of comprehension. The voices seemed to come from all around me, a soft saturation that made my skin crawl. I buried my head in my sleeping bag, trying to block out the sound, but it only seemed to grow louder. The whispers spoke of dark things, loneliness and fear, being lost and never found. They knew my name. They knew my deepest fears and insecurities. How long had I been out here? Days, weeks. Time seemed to blur and stretch in impossible ways. When morning finally came, I emerged from my tent feeling as if I hadn't slept at all. The whispers had faded with dawn, but their effect lingered. I felt drained both physically and mentally, my grip on reality seeming tenuous at best. As I forced down a meager breakfast, I tried to plan my next move. The stream seemed like my best bet for finding my way back to civilization. Water inevitably leads to larger rivers, and rivers often lead to roads or towns. It wasn't much, but it was the only strategy I had. I broke camp quickly, eager to be on the move. As I shouldered my pack, a glint of something metallic caught my eye. Curious, I moved closer to investigate. Half buried in mud near the stream bank was an old rusted tin. My heart leapt. Could this be a sign of other hikers? Of a trail or campsite nearby? With trembling fingers, I pried open the lid. Inside, protected from the elements, was a small notebook. The pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting faded but still legible. As I began to read, a chill ran down my spine. The journal belonged to another hiker, one who had become lost in these woods years ago. The entry started off optimistic, detailing plans for a week-long solo trek. But as I flipped through the pages, I watched the writer's mental state deteriorate. They wrote of being stalked by something in the forest, of hearing whispers in the night that drove them to the brink of madness. The final entry, dated nearly a decade ago, was a frantic scrawl. It's close now, I can feel it watching me, always watching. The whispers won't stop. They know everything. If anyone finds this, turn back, get out while you still can. Don't let the forest take you too. I dropped the notebook as if it had burned me, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sick joke, a prank left behind by other campers. But deep down, I knew the terror in those words was too raw, too familiar. With shaking hands, I shoved the notebook into my pack. Part of me wanted to leave it behind and pretend I'd never found it. But I couldn't. Whatever was happening here, this might be my only clue, my only connection to the truth. As I set off downstream, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest seemed different now, more sinister. Every shadow held potential threats, every rustling leaf a harbinger of doom. I pushed on, trying to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, but the words from the journal echoed in my mind. Don't let the forest take you too. I had been following the stream for hours, my progress slowed by the rough terrain and my own growing exhaustion. The sun had passed its zenith and was now sinking toward the western horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. Despite the physical exertion, I felt a deep chill that seemed to emanate from my very bones. It was then that I saw him, a figure standing motionless among the trees ahead. My heart leapt into my throat, a mixture of fear and desperate hope surging through me. Another person, someone who could help, who could guide me back to safety. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Can you help me? I'm lost." The figure didn't respond or move. As I drew closer, details began to resolve themselves. He was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothing that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was long and matted, his beard wild and unkempt, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold, pale, almost colorless, and filled with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He stood unnaturally still, head cocked slightly to one side as he regarded me. When he finally spoke, his voice was a dry rasp, as if he'd forgotten how to use it. "Lost," he said, the word sounding strange in his mouth. "No one gets lost here. The forest calls, and we answer." I took an involuntary step back, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from those unsettling eyes. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my own voice barely above a whisper. A smile stretched across his face, revealing teeth that were stained and broken. "I am a wanderer," he said. "I walk these woods, I listen to their whispers. And now you're here to join us." With surprising speed, he lurched towards me. I stumbled backwards, finally breaking free of the paralysis that had gripped me. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for direction or stealth. Behind me, I could hear the wanderer's raspy laughter seeming to come from everywhere at once. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. finally collapsing behind a large fallen tree. As I fought to catch my breath, I strained my ears for any sign of pursuit. The forest had gone eerily quiet, with no birds or insects breaking the oppressive silence. Minutes stretched into hours as I huddled there, too terrified to move. The light faded from the sky, plunging the woods into darkness. In the distance, I thought I could hear the wanderer calling out. His voice was carried on the wind. "You can't hide forever," he sang. "The forest knows. The forest sees. Join us in the dark, where the whispers never cease." I clapped my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it seemed to seep into my very thoughts. Memories of my old life, my job, my apartment, my friends and family felt distant and unreal. Had I ever truly existed outside of this forest? Or was this nightmare the only reality there had ever been? As the night wore on, I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, jerking awake at every sound. The wanderer's voice grew closer, then faded again, as if he were circling my hiding spot. Each time I heard him, the words were different, but the message was always the same: surrender to the forest, give in to the whispers, become one with the darkness. When dawn finally broke, I was huddled in a ball, shivering uncontrollably. My claws were soaked through with dew, and every muscle ached from the cold. But I was alive, and the wanderer was nowhere to be seen. As I slowly uncurled myself and took stock of my surroundings, a new determination settled over me. I couldn't give up. I couldn't let this place break me. Somehow I had to find a way out, had to warn others about what was happening in these woods. With stiff, clumsy movements, I retrieved my pack and checked my dwindling supplies. I had enough food for maybe 2 more days if I rationed carefully. My water was running low, but I still had my filter. I could do this. I had to do this. Setting my jaw, I picked a direction and started walking. I didn't know if it would lead me to safety or deeper into danger, but anything was better than staying put and waiting for the wanderer to find me again. As I moved through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The forest felt different now, more alive somehow, and deep down in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I could feel the whispers starting to take roots. Days blurred together as I pushed on through the endless forest. My supplies dwindled rapidly, forcing me to forage for whatever edible plants I could identify. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at my insides and clouding my thoughts. Sleep, when it came at all, was filled with nightmares of the wanderer and the horrors that lurked in the shadows. I had lost track of how long I'd been out here. My watch had stopped working, its face cracked from one of my many falls. The sun wasn't set, but time seemed to have lost all meaning. The only focus was on moving forward, always forward, in the desperate hope that I would eventually find my way out of this green hell. It was on what I guessed to be the 5th or 6th day that I came across the cave. I had been following a dry riverbed, my throat parched and burning with thirst, when I spotted the dark opening in the base of a cliff face. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep pushing on, but exhaustion and the promise of shelter won out. The cave entrance was narrow, forcing me to remove my pack and squeeze through sideways. Inside, it opened up into a larger chamber, the air noticeably cooler and damp. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I froze in horror at what I saw. The walls of the cave were covered in crude drawings, stick figures and strange symbols etched into the stone. They depicted scenes of violence and madness, people being chased by shadowy creatures, bodies contorted in agony, faces twisted into inhuman grimaces, and everywhere represented by swirling patterns were the whispers. I wanted to run to get as far away from this place as possible, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I found myself moving deeper into the cave, drawn by a morbid fascination. The drawings seemed to move in the flickering light of my headlamp, the figures writhing and dancing in a grotesque parade. At the back of the cave, I found a small alcove. Inside, arranged with unsettling care, were personal belongings, backpacks, cameras, wallets, all in various states of decay. trembling hands, I examined them, recognizing gear from different decades. How long had people been disappearing in these woods? Among the items I found more journals and notebooks. Each told a similar story, hikers who had become lost, who had encountered the Wanderer and other less human things in the forest. At first I thought it was just water dripping from the ceiling, but as it grew louder I realized with dawning horror that it was footsteps. I scrambled to gather my things to find a place to hide, but the cave offered no refuge. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a low guttural humming. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would burst from my chest. Just as I was about to make a desperate dash for the entrance, the source of the sound appeared. It was the Wanderer, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the cave mouth. Those pale, unnerving eyes found me immediately. A smile spreading across his face. "Welcome home," he rasped, spreading his arms wide. "I knew you'd find your way here eventually, they always do." I backed away, fumbling for my bear spray, but my fingers felt numb and clumsy. The Wanderer advanced slowly, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. "What do you want from me?" The Wanderer tilted his head, regarding me with something like pity. "I told you before, I am the Wanderer. I am the voice of the forest, the keeper of its secrets. And you, my friend, are its newest disciple." He lunged forward with inhuman speed. I raised my arms to defend myself, but it was too late. His hands, cold and strong as iron, gripped my shoulders. The world spun, and there was only darkness. I awoke to the sound of chanting. My head throbbed. And when I tried to move, I found my wrists and ankles bound with rough lines. I was lying on cold, damp stone, still in the cave. I realized with a jolt of panic. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I made out shadowy figures moving around me. They were people, or at least they had been once. And they were like the Wanderer, emaciated, wild-eyed, more animal than human. They swayed and chanted in a language I didn't recognize. Their voices blended in a disturbing mix of ecstasy and agony. The Wanderer stood over me, his pale eyes gleaming in the darkness. "The forest has chosen you," he said, his voice cutting through chants. "It speaks to you, doesn't it? In the whispers, in the shadows, it's time for you to listen, truly hear." He pressed something to my lips, a crude cup made from bark. The liquid inside was dark and bitter, with an odor that made my stomach churn. I tried to turn away, but hands gripped my head, forcing the concoction down my throat. The effect was almost immediate. The cave began to spin, colors and shapes blurring together. The chanting grew louder, seeming to come from inside my own head. And then the visions began. I saw the forest as I'd never had before, alive, pulsing with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. The ground writhed with shadowy forms, neither plant nor animal, but something in between. Through it all, I heard the whispers, no longer just at the edge of my consciousness, but clear and overwhelming. They spoke of secrets buried in the earth, of powers beyond human comprehension. They promised knowledge, power, transcendence, if only I would surrender myself completely to the forest. I don't know how long I lay there, lost in that hallucinatory nightmare. I died and was reborn 1,000 times, my sense of self fragmenting and reforming with each cycle. When I finally came back to some semblance of reality, I was alone in the cave. The cultist, the Wanderer, all gone. Only the drawings on the walls remained, now seeming to pulse with a life of their own. My bones had been cut, but I found myself barely able to move. Every muscle screamed in protest as I dragged myself to my feet. My mind felt fractured, thoughts slipping away before I could fully grasp them. But one thing remained clear. I had to get out of this cave, out of these woods, before I lost myself completely. I stumbled out of the cave into darkness. Night had fallen while I was trapped in that psychedelic hell, and the forest was alive with sounds I had never noticed before. Insects buzzed in complex patterns that seemed almost like speech. The wind through the trees carried whispered fragments of forgotten languages. My sense of direction was completely shot. Every tree, every rock looked familiar and alien at the same time. I picked a direction at random and started walking, driven by a primal need to keep moving. As I walked, memories of my old life bubbled to the surface. My job, my friends, my family. They all seemed like characters from a half-remembered dream. Had I ever really existed outside of this forest, or was this my true reality? The world beyond the trees felt nothing but a comforting illusion. The whispers grew stronger as the night wore on. They no longer frightened me as they once had. Instead, they felt almost comforting, like old friends welcoming me home. Part of me knew this was wrong, that I was losing my grip on sanity, but that part grew weaker with each passing hour. I lost all track of time as I wandered through the darkened woods. The moon rose and set, stars wheeled overhead. But it could have been one night or 100 for all I knew. My body moved on autopilot, branches and thorns tearing at my clothes and skin, but I barely felt the pain. As dawn began to break, I found myself on the edge of a small clearing. In its center stood a massive old tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted into an almost human shape. Something about it called to me, drawing me forward with an irresistible pull. As I approached, I saw that the bark was carved with the same symbols I had seen in the cave. They seemed to writhe and shift as I looked at them, forming words and images that hovered just beyond comprehension. I passed my hand against the trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath my fingers. And in that moment, everything changed. The tree's bark seemed to melt away beneath my touch, revealing a swirling vortex of darkness. Before I could react, I was pulled inside, falling through an impossible space of fractured memories and half-formed thoughts. I saw the forest as it had been thousands of years ago, pristine and untouched by human hands. I saw the first people to enter these woods, their awe and fear as they encountered something beyond their understanding. I saw others like the wanderer, drawn to the forest power across the centuries, becoming one with its dark heart. And I saw myself, not as I had been, but as I could be. A creature of bark and leaf, shadow and whisper, free from humanity's constraints, at one with the primal force that pulsed through every root and branch. The visions ended as abruptly as they began. I found myself back in the clearing on my knees before the ancient tree, but everything was different now. The colors were sharper, the scents richer. I could feel the life force of every plant and animal around me, connected in a vast, intricate web. The whispers were no longer outside of me, but a part of me. I understood them now, their secrets and power. The forest had accepted me, remade me in its own image. As the sun rose fully, painting the clearing in golden light, footsteps approached. The wanderer emerged from the trees, but I no longer felt fear at his sight. He was keen now, a brother in the service of something greater than ourselves. "Welcome," he said, a genuine smile creasing his weathered face. "The forest has chosen well. Are you ready to take your place among us?" I stood, feeling strength and power coursing through my transformed body. The last vestiges of my old self, doubts and fears that had plagued me, melted away like morning mist. "Yes," I replied, my voice resonant with newfound authority. "I am ready." As we walked deeper into the heart of the forest, I cast one last thought to the world I had left behind. A pang of something, regret and nostalgia, flitted through me. But it was fleeting, swept away by the whispers that now filled my mind. I had found my true home, my true purpose. And as the trees closed in around us, I embraced the darkness that had become my destiny.